Good evening and welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and powered by our favorite sponsor, Tireget.com. That's Tireget.com. You all have to buy tires from somebody. You might as well buy them from us and help fund the movement, help support the movement. We believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I am your host, Royce White, here in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota, for episode 114. I always get this wrong. I got to become more prepared. Episode 114, I believe it is. But 115. Glad I checked.
There you go.
Episode 115. And today we have another incredible family and friends guest episode. The great Professor Penn is back in the studio with us today.
Hello. Good afternoon to you. Good evening to the listeners and viewers.
Thanks for being with us. It's always a pleasure. It's always a blast. Where to even begin right now? I mean, obviously, all of the news in the world is around the Palestine-Israel conflict, and we've been talking about it a lot. I talked about it on the podcast a lot. I know you've been talking about it on your podcast.
We talked about it the first time we ever talked.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
the birthplace of our association was
Yeah.
you. Well, it's a great story. We've told it before, but it's
Yeah.
worth telling again.
Yeah.
So when you
Yeah.
were running for Congress, seeking the Republican Party endorsement in CD5 in 2022 to run against Ilhan Omar, a strong supporter of Hamas, I think. Is that a true statement or a false statement?
It'd be hard for me to assume what Ilhan Omar actually believes or doesn't believe.
But there has been some.
She's certainly more the pro-Palestinian
Well,
position.
there's been some pushback in the Democrat Party from the more left elements, which
Mm-hmm.
they've brought some feedback to the Democrat, because of course the story in the Democrat Party is they're all in lockstep,
Yeah.
and that's not true.
Yeah.
But the story is great.
I wouldn't want to say she's pro-Hamas without confirming that she's actually said that.
I'm asking a
But it
question.
would
I
not
don't know.
it would not surprise me if she was sympathetic to Hamas's cause.
Well, she's got to be a little bit more sympathetic than, let's say, Kevin McCarthy.
Much more sympathetic, I would presume.
I would say there's got to be some kind of relativity.
Yeah.
But I want to tell this story for your listeners and your viewers, because I think it's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
And I had been watching you on War Room, I don't know, for 3/4 of a year. And I started asking around, who is this guy? Oh, he went to Hopkins High School? Really? Because I didn't know who you were.
Yeah.
And my son had graduated from Hopkins. So I called my son because he was at Hopkins the same time you were there. I said, Jake, would you please get me Royce White's telephone number? No problem, Dad. Nothing happened. Couldn't do it. And then I asked another young man, our friend Mr. Jeff, who had been out in the streets with you during the George Floyd protests. I said, Jeff, could you please run? You're in the community. Could you please run? A friend of mine, run him down.
Yeah.
Couldn't do it. Because I was frustrated, because in my mind I was thinking, not knowing you, that you would be a hell of a candidate for the Republican Party. And as an officer, I wanted to meet you, at least get you involved in local politics, not knowing you. And then I get a call from, what was his name? Matthew? What was his last name?
Matt Brodsky.
Matt Brodsky. He was the campaign manager for
Cicely Davis.
Right. And I had been involved a little bit with their campaign because, as somebody involved in politics, they wanted to gain my support. And Matt calls me up and Matt goes, Royce White's declaring for Congress. I go, okay, great. He goes, but we don't have to worry about it because he's an anti-Semite. And I said, really? And I'd been watching you on War Room, and I will tell the listeners and viewers that those of us that are of the Jewish persuasion have a very finely tuned radar about anti-Semitism, because most of the times it's sticks and stones. Occasionally it's a Luger to the back of the head. So we're very aware when people are anti-Semitic. And I never made any anti-Semitic energy in all of your appearances on War Room.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a disconnect. And I said, I got to find out for myself. So I immediately you know, you're going to get something done. You got to do it for yourself. I phoned you in 2 hours. Sent my emissaries. They screwed it up. I got it done. And you immediately called me and we started to talk. And the first thing you said to me was, you know, Israel is the linchpin of globalism. And that was a stunning thing for me to hear because I'd never thought about it that way because people of my generation are filled with judgments about this conflict and about the Jewish people and the Palestinian people, the Arab people. And Jewish people don't see themselves as being the linchpin of globalism. So we actually got in the ring and went toe to toe for about 2 or 3 hours about this. And I really thought that was a great conversation for me because the truth will set you free. And that's how we met. So we've been talking about this issue
A while.
a while,
Since the beginning.
constantly.
Yeah, and first off, Matt Brodsky is everything that's wrong with Republican Party politics, with the Republican Party here in Minnesota, but with Republican Party politics all across the country. Number one, it's a grave accusation to call somebody anti-Semitic in the first place, especially somebody who is circumcised, nonetheless. Um, and I joke, but it's not really a joke. In fact, kind of one of the cornerstones of the whole faith to be circumcised. I mean, it's common now, it's funny, but there was nothing funny about, this wasn't, you and I always joke, this wasn't medical grade circumcision
Oh, back in the day?
back in the day of the
Well,
tribe.
back
Right.
in the day, it was a commitment.
It was a serious commitment
I mean,
to
actually,
God.
I think
Right.
the way it actually worked was people were older, like military age males.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to join Abraham and be with the players, hey, there was a ritual of inclusion. Occasionally, when that happened back in those days, somebody got a blood infection and died. And what they said was, he deserved to die. You know, it was a different kind of a consciousness
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah. And so, it's a grave accusation to call somebody anti-Semitic, especially somebody you don't know. And I don't think there's anything that I ever said publicly that would back up this idea that I'm anti-Semitic. I mean, when you grow up in the black community here in the Midwest, be hard pressed to find a young black man whose parents were in any way um, thinking about politics, following politics that don't know about Minister Louis Farrakhan. I mean, Minister Louis Farrakhan is considered a very um, important intellectual black figure in politics. Faith aside, I mean, let's set Islam aside. Let's set the Nation of Islam aside. Let's set religion aside completely. Minister Louis Farrakhan is considered a very important political figure in the black community.
A community leader.
He's a community leader. And so, I think people look at Minister Louis Farrakhan who have gotten a story or get their politics with French fries. Let's just be frank about it. And they just call him an anti-Semite straight out. I mean, and so if you ever posted anything about Minister Louis Farrakhan, now you're an anti-Semite as well. Same with Donald Trump. I mean, they call Donald Trump an anti-Semite. Some people do. And if you've ever posted any support or any agreement with anything Donald Trump says, you're a far right-wing nationalist, white supremacist, racist, and eventually, if need be, an anti-Semite. Also sexist and homophobic and transphobic and xenophobic. I mean, there's the whole laundry list. We know what it is. We know what it is.
Lustful, it means whatever
We know the laundry list. It's a laundry list of things that you could say. And there's all these people out there in the periphery, away from the status quo of power. They may be aligned with the status quo ideologically, but where they sit in terms of power, like a Matt Brodsky, who really is insignificant in the grand scheme of politics in America. He's a grifter. He's a genuine grifter, and he's a lower down the trough grifter, just siphoning money off of political campaigns in districts where the higher ups, want to run a scam. And that's what they did in CC's campaign. That's why she raised $1 million or so before I ever got involved in the race. And by the time I had gotten involved in the race, they were already in financial trouble. And by the time the race was done, You didn't see one sign of CC Davis anywhere in Minnesota media, anywhere on any billboards. We had more billboards than she did. Where did they spend the money? Well, you can go look at her financials and see where they spent the money. A lot of consultants and third party fundraisers got money in order to steal money from the American taxpayer is what they did. And they used Ilhan Omar. Funny we mentioned her. They used Ilhan Omar as they always plan to use Ilhan Omar as a way to raise money from geriatric, middle age or boomer white Republicans and conservatives from rural America or wherever else in the country. They don't like Ilhan. They're right to not like Ilhan. But the scam is putting themselves in between the transaction of the American people who are dissatisfied or don't like Ilhan and the candidate that is supposedly going to run against her. And that was CC Davis. And then they ran her out there. They knew she had no chance to win. Matt Brosky knew she had no chance to win. Matt Brosky and some others who you can feel comfortable to name if you would like. They knew she had no chance to win, just like they know Nikki Haley has no chance to win. And it's unironic that it's the same sort of cohort of people behind both candidates. Cicely, who I ran in the primary in the Minnesota, Republican primary for House, and Nikki Haley, two never Trumpers at heart, but they'll say anything they need to position themselves the right way. Point being, Matt Brosky would say anti-Semitism because it's kind of a default way to cast one of the ugliest cast one of the ugliest aspersions on somebody they can.
Can I just interject here?
Yeah, please.
The reason I called you is because it's such a heinous allegation. I wanted to find out for myself.
Yeah. If
I
you
mean,
needed to clip me.
more or less, yes.
Okay. Right.
To get down to it.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
because, I'm going to not back down from a fight.
Yeah.
But, this is another thing for people that are. A lot of Jewish people watch Professor Penn podcast. I know because I communicate with them in the live chats.
Yeah.
And they leave comments and I try to answer them and they reach out to me. And this is a very triggering time. When I say triggering, with this kind of bloodshed and this kind of media and these kind of events, and really the world at a potential, I'm not saying we're at the precipice of World War III, but it could be a node
We're
to
right
go.
there.
We
We're
could
right
go
there.
there, right?
Yeah, we're right there.
It's a time for people to examine what they think and what they feel and why they feel.
Mm.
And the anti-Semitism thing for someone of my cohort is different than the younger people.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have this memory of people, when you know people whose people were killed, I don't even know if it's right, but the Overton window, the window of what anti-Semitism is linked to genocide.
Right.
It's not linked to people having opinions about globalism. Because I remember when you declared for Congress and you talked about globalism, our local leading newspaper, the Minneapolis Star Tribune, also made similar comments just by bringing up globalism.
No, they made the exact same comment. And that kind of tells you who Matt Brodsky is, right? I don't mean to keep bringing his name up, and it's not just Matt Brodsky. It's Matt Brodsky as a symbol of the sort of rhino neocon Republican insider that continues to stifle the nationalist, populist, or for lack of a better term, MAGA and Trump movement. I myself prefer ultra MAGA because I'm the hatchet man. But hey, whatever you want to call it, these Republican Party insiders or consultants or activists all around the country are just like Matt Brodsky. And it's not by accident that his point of view, his worldview around anything, but specifically with regards to me, would line up with one of the most liberal newspapers in the entire country.
And in hindsight, having been in the conversation with him, which was the trigger for me reaching out to you, I realized that his use of anti-Semitism was completely instrumental. It had nothing to do with what you believed or didn't believe or said or didn't say. He was just going to say you're an anti-Semite to discredit you. And when he started saying it, a whole range of Jewish publications here in the Twin Cities immediately jumped on the bandwagon and just assumed you're anti-Semitic. So I would like to say to the world, because I actually know you, you're not an anti-Semite.
Yeah,
They're just going to have to deal with it.
w-
That you can have an opinion
yeah.
or a policy position about
Well,
globalism.
let's talk about it. Number one, we have a very, very close relationship, almost a family. It is a family relationship. We're family.
I agree.
Yeah. Real anti-Semites, and this is the thing that they've kind of warped the American mind on around racism as well, and around sexism and homophobia. I mean, all of them are kind of interchangeable, right? Depending on who you're talking to or about.
But I still think the anti-Semitism thing is in the
Oh, it's
pantheon.
the sine qua non. You
Yes.
know, it is a sine qua non, and that's what I'm trying to get to here. But I'm familiar with it because I see the similarity in how race is used, right? And so real anti-Semites, real racists, real sexists, real homophobes, or people who have a genuine hate animus towards gay people. There are no exceptions to the rule. There aren't any exceptions made. There isn't like, oh, this guy's a Jew and he's okay, or I hate black people, but this guy's black and
Some of my
he's
best
okay.
friends are black. Some of my best friends are Jewish.
Yes,
We're not talking about, that's not anti-Semitism.
yes,
Anti-Semitism, to me, you get in a room with somebody who's anti-Semite, they will kill you. That's anti-Semitism. Right?
absolutely.
Then we just see that in
No, and I mean, you can, if you want to continue on this sort of post enlightenment, loose play on words, loose use of the English language to be ambiguous and arbitrary for any circumstance you need to make the argument you want. Sure, you could walk down the trough with anti-Semitism and say anything anybody says that is critical of Jewish people that I don't agree with is anti-Semitic. Anything that anybody says that's critical of black people that I don't agree with is racist. Anything anybody says that's homophobia and sexism and on the borders, xenophobic. I mean, you could do it all day long. But the reality is I spend more time with Jewish people in my life than almost anybody else. Any other group of people. I mean, we're together all the time.
I mean, but this is something that I think people, I want to say it.
It'd be hard to put an act on all the time. Not impossible, but it'd be hard.
But using smears to discredit a conversation or the marketplace of ideas is what all of our politics has been about since 45.
Absolutely.
And that's why we've got all these judgments, which I will say as a Jewish person, Christ said, judge not lest you be judged.
Mm.
What did he mean by that? He meant don't be judged. Don't be a judge. We're not judges. Our job is to be open to spiritual matters, not be making decisions about things. We're not in that role.
But even in saying that, even in referencing Christ or quoting Christ could be viewed as anti-Semitic. The great Ben Shapiro once said that to him Christ was nothing more than a Jewish rebel that started a rebellion against the Roman army and got what he deserved because he did.
That was nice of him. He gussied that up a little bit. That's really not what they taught him. I will tell you what they taught him because I was taught the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
He was an apostate and a pretender and a schmuck. That's what Jewish people, religious Jewish peoples, are taught because the greatest fear in the Jewish religion is intermarriage and people moving from Judaism to Christianity. There's a huge cultural barrier. You're a heretic if you do that. So if you profess any sensitivity to Jesus Christ or willingness to study his word,
you're out.
You violated the
You're out.
cornerstone of the whole deal.
Yeah, you're out, but you're not out. And I mean, this is kind of let's get to the root of the politics and the history because I think it's important. Maybe one of the most important times in history that a black man and a Jewish man can sit across from each other and talk about these things. That's why they call us HEBROES. HEBROES, we feel especially qualified to talk about the issue with some sort of levity, even though it's tragic and the stakes are as high as possible.
Hard to be funny right now.
It's hard to be funny, but laugh to keep from crying.
Maybe the idea is we should, as a people, maintain because it's our choice about how we respond to this.
Yeah.
And not let ourselves get dragged down, but maintain our goodwill. in the face of this assault. But go ahead. Let's go back to the way back.
Yeah, I mean, when I say that, when I told you that Israel is the linchpin of globalism, I think we were able to move past that early part of our conversation and meeting one another, because I immediately qualified it that it's not necessarily a criticism of the Jews. I think even in our conversations, because the Jews are your people, you're a little more critical of your own people than I would be, and I'm a little bit more critical of black people than you would be, which I think is healthy.
Can I say something in reference to
Yeah,
this conversation,
yeah.
which I have enough distance and time to say it?
Hmm.
The judgment that the Jewish people, that Israel is the linchpin of globalism, what it really ran into in me was that would mean someone's using me. And if I
And that would
believe
be correct.
and if I believe that I'm using everybody else, we've got a little disconnect here because instead of being the master, we're actually the slave.
And that is what I was referencing. And I think the Star Tribune was extremely unfair and but but not but not unintentionally. It was very intentional, because I think the Star Tribune, at least I would hope, I wouldn't be surprised if the writers at the Star Tribune aren't smart enough to understand a nuance like that. But I kind of would hope they would. I would grant them that, benefit of the doubt. But in granting them the benefit of the doubt, we end up at the place where they knew full well that there was nuance to my approach on my when it comes to policy, foreign policy with Israel, and the political history. And again, I've always said that the Jews are being used in a very similar way that black people have been used, in a very similar way that women have been used, in a very similar way now gays and lesbians
Palestinians.
and people who have severe mental illness, and people who are trans and want to cut their penis off. Everybody has the opportunity to be used by people who see it advantageous to do so. And the Jews are no different. And it makes it really strange. It makes it a real hard cultural conversation to have, conversations that need to be had, when you can't even say the word Jewish or talk about Jewish people in any way, even as benign and casually as that, by saying, hey, Jews can be used just like anybody else without being anti Semitic.
Well, the judgment substrate here again is the difference between being subservient to God and believing you're chosen by God. To be Jewish is to be subservient to God.
Mm.
But if you get into this, I'm chosen, then I'm with God. How could I be used if I'm with God? So you run into that judgment of superiority, where one race is superior and another one's inferior. And that is definitely a part of my background as being an American Jew. And
There's a
even
superiority in the Jewish community.
it's hard to say because I know I'm going to be bringing some fire down on myself saying it, but I'm going to be very definitive about
Well,
this.
there's a lot of, in fairness, as a response. Let's go back a little bit first, okay?
Okay.
Just before,
Before we go right off the cliff.
let's not get the episode pulled down in the first 20 minutes. We got all day, folks. We're here at Free People Radio, and we want to send a special thank you to the War Room Posse. And I think I'm becoming a staple of the nighttime hour there in the War Room, in the War Room cohort, and in the MAGA community, which is good, because my opinion is varying. I don't really pull any punches, and I just say things how they are. And on here, we have conversations that you're supposed to not be able to have, and I think we do them with some grace. But hold on a second there, my friend. Okay. Um, in response to a very racially charged history in America, a very racially charged history in the West, in response to what many wrongly identify as white race, colonial superiority, black people, modern day black people, have developed this sense of superiority. And we even tell ourselves very odd, very strange, um, cultural stories about superiority, like melanin, for example, that the whiter you are, you can't live under the sun. And well, there's something unnatural about not being able to live under the sun because, I mean, we're a photosynthesizing organism, for Christ's sake, right? I mean, if you can't live under the thing that gives you basic sustenance, it's kind of an indictment of your
Survivability. It's
well,
a very
of your
Darwinist.
basic makeup.
It's a very Darwinist
It's a
argument.
very Darwinist argument.
That is the
And
that's
that is not uncommon, not accidental, that people who face some form of oppression in the rebound will adopt the same ideology and pervert it that subjugated them in the first place. And I think that's an important cultural statement to make right now, historically, because not only had that happened with the Jews, in my opinion, but it also has happened with black people. And you could make the argument now that it's starting to happen with Arabs and Palestinians and others who are of the more pro-Palestinian variety looking at this fight.
that sentiment in the Jewish community, in the American Jewish community, is linked to the nation of Israel, the formation of Israel in 48. You go back,
Proceed.
well, if you go back just 3 years, it was 45, and the American uh, army was liberating these concentration camps and these horrifying images of brutality unparalleled in human history.
World War II.
Of course, until the United States dropped the nuclear bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, our country
Outdid
we
themselves.
outdid ourselves in a
Yeah.
similar kind of. But of course, that's never thought of in that way. But
We'll talk about that later
well, I
because
think
we're at that time again. So
again.
we should talk about
Well,
that.
here's a scam.
Leave a pin in
Here's a scam.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Well, let's leave a scam in the rules of war, because now we're talking about if the rules of war is at the end we tip the table over and kill everybody. The rules are kind of a scam, right? But we'll come back to that. No, the history of European Jewry was one of oppression, of poverty, uh, of lack of mobility in those societies, except interestingly in Germany, where German Jews were accepted into uh, the society. But in the other countries, Romania, Poland, Russia, Ukraine, Jews had no entree into the prevailing power structures of those countries. And it was an unhappy life. It actually bred Marxism in the Jewish community because they wanted to overturn the people that were holding them down.
Social politics overcame cultural tradition.
Well, they came to the conclusion, if I'm living poor like this, there must not be a God. If there was a God and I believed in him, why am I living like this? And then some rabbi would say, well, at the time the Jews went in the land of Israel, they didn't do what God told them to do. You're telling me that something that happened thousands of years ago is why I'm poor? Screw off. I'm out. Because we were in the post-Enlightenment period, people had books. There was new philosophies. I mean, there was options for people that did not exist previously.
Mm.
But the community was beat down. And the Jews that came to this country were put into ghettos, and there was a lot of anti-Semitism right here in Minneapolis, St. Paul.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible. I mean, it was the realization in the American culture of the horrors of the Darwinist Nazis that opened up a window for Jewish people to get into the society at all. And they became the linchpin of globalism, at that time.
Yeah.
But the sentiment was not one of superiority. It was one of inferiority, intergenerational inferiority culturally that was balanced by deep religiosity and subservience to God.
Yeah, again, the rise of, let's call it the rise of the Jews here in America, and there certainly has been. There are a number of there are a number of story arcs here with the Jewish people that many are getting conflated. You know, one being the historical, the most historical, the ancient storyline of the Jewish people and Christ and the religious part of it and that whole deal. And then you have European Jewry, which has its own lineage, it has its own multitude of factions, like we saw there in Russia. You had Bolshevik Jews, yeah, but you had Jews who denounced communism too and didn't want communism and so on and so forth. You got, like today, Jews who went secular, Jews who are still religious. And then in the early 1900s, during the Great Migration, you had Jews who were mostly poor. And I think people miss out on that because today we kind of explain Jewishness as having this business, intellectual, academic gravitas, right?
Oh, and let me just comment on that if I could just for a
Yeah,
second.
yeah.
That's not Jewish.
Slow down there, partner. Slow down there. We'll get there in a moment.
I'm just
I
saying.
don't want to be interjecting. Cutting
That's not a
a Jew
Jewish.
off by talking about
That's
Jewish
not
issues,
a Jewish philosophy.
but hold on a second. Just we'll get there. We'll get there in due time. I just wanted to say that these storylines, um, people are trying to grab a hold of at all different places. And they're running them together. They're running into each other, and people just lose their minds when you talk about Jews in either direction. I mean, it's such a hot button. When I'll go on Jason, I always make sure to mention that the real thrust to anti-Semitism. I mean, you could go back and talk about the rift of Christianity, Christ and the Jews, because there's 2 billion Christians on the planet. So that history lives in a lot 2 billion people's faith practice and tradition. There's a rift there. Um, but most people's um, political affiliation of anti-Semitism is related to the Holocaust and Hitler, right? At least that's the linchpin of globalism. And when I said it was the linchpin of globalism, I'm not even talking about the Jewish people. I'm really talking about the political structures and the national and foreign policy of our country, but many nations all around the world that were constructed after World War II on the basis that we can never let the Holocaust happen again. But it really wasn't even the Holocaust when you get down to it, because obviously those same agencies and bodies lent themselves to a number of other genocides ex post facto. And they're actually on the brink of having one of the worst genocides in human history right now, not in Palestine. I'm talking about on a worldwide basis with medicine and technology and ecto farms or whatever else. So we really didn't get past genocide at all, but that was certainly how they told it. And I always go back to the history that Adolf Hitler used financial, economic, moral hazard, bad economic policy as a lightning rod to galvanize the Nazi Party in Germany. And it's a history we talked about many times, but the Great Depression hit. We went to World War One. Germany lost the war. They were made to pay reparations to the other European nations. America and other interested parties there in Europe decided or agreed to pay the reparations, or they backed it, they funded it, and basically profited off of Germany of the rebuild of Nazi Germany, not Nazi Germany, but Germany as a country. And then our economy busts, and then we called in the loans on Germany, the loans for those reparations, and then Germany's economy busts, and then Hitler rises up and says, these banksters with these loans that were predatory are the reason why you're poor and have a shitty life.
And there was another element to this too that was
Mhm.
working for Hitler at the same time and for the German people, particularly the Nazis, because it was the Nazi party was a socialist workers' party. It was a socialist workers' party. It was a fascistic form of governance,
Workers' movement.
a workers' movement different than the workers' movement of the communist variety, the Marxist Trotskyist movement, which was, as I said a little bit earlier, spearheaded by Jews who had given up their faith, had adopted Marx as their new Bible, cornerstone of which was there's no God, God is the opiate of the masses, religion is the opiate of the masses. They had rejected Judaism, they had rejected God, and they were in their own workers' movement. But these two movements were really deeply at odds with each other. And why? Because the Nazi movement was Darwinist in the extreme with a master race as the goal. The communist movement
Collectivism.
was collectivism.
Mhm.
So the
Global collectivism,
and so
if possible.
Hitler saw that Bolshevik, Trotskyite, Marxist, Jewish movement as the deepest threat to his Nazi movement. So there was that American loans and bankster gangsters and They pulled the rug out from underneath the German people, and the German people had a massive dislocation, tremendous unemployment, suffering, horrifying, which fueled the rise of the Nazi Party. Certainly. I think there's broad agreement amongst scholars about that.
Academics, yeah.
Yeah, but on the other part of it, the people don't realize the intensity with which the Nazis and the Bolsheviks were in competition for the same market, which was workers.
Mm. Not much different than we have here in our country.
We got the same thing going on in the streets right now. We just
Mhm.
don't understand it well yet. But it'll get clearer the more the street violence intensifies. As we
And, and so, and, the globalism piece, and I think this is always important to understand. I've been I take heat all the time from people within the MAGA movement. I take heat from people who, black Christians, who are probably more of the Protestant variety, but they could be Catholic too. Whatever the case, Christians. I take heat from Muslims. I take heat from all kinds of people saying, "Why are you caping up for the Jews? The Jews are a problem. They're a real problem." So I've actually, as a third party, like on Jason when I said I'm Jewish because I'm circumcised. And Catholicism, like we said the other day, and you could talk about it. You'll say it better than I can, but the earliest church was made up of Jews. I don't know what we're talking about. How this idea came about that Judaism is a white man's religion, or that Christianity is a white man's religion, is ridiculous. I don't know what they're talking about. And also this more modern theory about the Khazars, where your tribe comes from, the Ukraine, those Jews, that if you pick up the faith, this whole idea about who are the original Jews, um,
Jewish identity.
believing in God, believing in Christ is not a it's not a it's not a bloodline thing. That's what Christ did. So it's weird to hear Christians talk about that, right? You know what I mean? So the idea about the original Jews is that the original Jews were the Israelites, right? The Hebrew Israelites, and this whole black movement that says that the Jewish identity was stolen. And I've always said to these people, if you have to 23andMe your Jewish identity or your Hebrew Israelite faith practice, tradition, ties, that means somewhere along the line your people sold out, or they lost a fight, a very important fight,
And intermarried and were assimilated.
or they lost a fight and were all killed, and and
That too.
and had your faith taken from you. But just as a general, just as a general common happening in history, if you come to cross swords with a people who completely obliterate you on the battlefield, they don't pick up your religious relics or tradition. That's not how it works. They may take your women. They may enslave your children. They don't pick up your idols. That's not a it's not a real thing. When the Ottomans came and took over, they didn't pick up. Nobody does that. Is what I'm saying. Genghis Khan and picking up the idols of the people that lost, because, well, number one, you lost.
You convert or you die.
Why would I pick up your idols? Your idols are losers.
Right.
It's kind of, that was Darwinian too. But anyway, my point is, there's this entire original Jewish argument. Hebrews, from Negroes to Hebrews to Negroes, right? That was the controversy around Kyrie Irving and that story that came out of there, or the story that was told in that documentary. Um, and my like I said to you, if you got a 23andMe your Jewish identity, somewhere along the line your people lost or they sold out. But even more importantly than that, faith in God, the Abrahamic faith, monotheistic faith, is a voluntary faith. Anybody can believe in God. So this idea that there are Jews who are original or real or not real, or these are the fake Jews, is ridiculous. If you believe in God, historically, the identity is based on the cornerstone of belief in God, which, if there's an argument to be made about Israel, about Zionism versus Judaism, about the Jewish identity, which we talked about on the first night, it is dishonest, it is disingenuous, it is manipulative manipulative to try and um for lack of a better term, lead with an identity that rests upon a faith in God when you've completely rejected God. It's like calling yourself a Christian, but you don't believe in Christ. It's like calling yourself a Muslim, but you don't believe in the Quran. You can say that you're that thing, but there's really no substance to it.
Well, this when you were talking about the European traditions, you left out Zionism.
Right.
You didn't mention it. Could have been on purpose.
Of course it was.
Okay, well, see, I mean, I can talk about it.
I'm not mentioning it to go around it. It's just that, again, I mean, again, people are so sensitive about this whole issue. I think about it not in terms of being afraid, but in terms of trying to talk about it in a way that lets people access the conversation without checking out, because there's so many prejudgments about it.
That's what I said. Judge not, lest you be judged. I mean, this
Yeah,
is
Zionism. Zionism is not Judaism.
Well, not only is it not Judaism,
But there are people
it's
who
a rejection of Judaism.
But there are people who reject Judaism on face value. So that, for them to understand or get to the idea that Zionism is a split from Judaism is already a Rubicon for a lot of people. And those are people who some would say have that natural anti-Semitic sort of impulse to them.
Well,
But it's a very
cuts
solid
both ways.
political explanation.
But let me just say, just the root of the claim of the Zionist. I didn't say the Jewish person. I said the Zionist.
Mm-hmm.
And this is if you go back to the history, the agreed upon history. And I want to say to some of my viewers and listeners, we speak in broad brushes.
Yeah.
Because we have to describe the narrative. And I had someone I really like that follows the Professor Penn podcast. And I said, look, Zionists were not Jews. They were Marxists. And this is a person I really like communicating with. And he said, well, what about my 85-year-old grandmother that lives in Israel that's super faithful? Yes, she's there. But we have to talk about in broad narrative terms so we can understand the poetry of the world we live in, because we live by stories. And some of these stories are very disingenuous. Let me just use that word. The claim of Zionism to Israel was based in the Bible, that God had given the land of Israel to the Jewish people. But they didn't believe in God or the Bible. So that's kind of wrapping your nationalist, colonialist, settler project in the cloth of faith. And we do that a lot in this country right now today. Not just Jews. We have
all of us.
Well, I can't go that far, because all is a cognitive distortion. Most of us.
All of us who, okay, let's put it this way. If you have a sort of globalist, egomaniac kind of, deal that you want to run, scam that you want to run, power you want to grab, very common for people to wrap themselves in religion to do it. And that's not an indictment of God. It's the same thing that we said about the early American settlers. Yeah, they made a mistake with slavery. The Constitution helped us rectify that mistake. Took 100 or so years. Took a couple 100 years. Seems like a long time to the people who were slaves, born and died in slavery. But in the grand scheme of history, for that type of change to happen in 200 years, significant.
To reverse all of human history in a couple 100 years.
Right.
That's a tremendous change in consciousness. Now, we've had this conversation, and I agree with it. It's not that slavery ended. Wage slavery is more efficient, because you get the wage slave to pay for himself. Where when you have a chattel slave, you got to take care of him. So I'm not so sure that we, but, and then I want to say in terms of
but in fairness, as a black man, I must say,
okay,
yes, they evolved the slavery. The real turn of the tide for slavery was the idea was industrialization, right? Industrialization and technological advancement, and this new idea, this new vision of a future of a humanity that could, in fact, achieve a level of slavery that was efficient and effective, um, without the brutality.
Well,
And
not only that, but when you have a country like America, we're ending now a very long period of freedom. We're fighting to maintain that space for freedom, which is for creativity.
right,
And when people are creative, they don't necessarily have to identify as wage slaves because they're getting a chance to pursue their own life, liberty, and happiness.
right,
And so we're sitting on why we're doing this work is because when you take away that future path and you preclude human beings from pursuing their life, their liberty, and their happiness, wage slavery takes on a much more ominous kind of characteristic.
well, what I was going to say is, um, there's a big difference between being in shackles, having your neck and your wrists and your feet chained, and being the willful participant in a political and financial Ponzi scheme, even at the global scale. There's a big difference, and I think it's uh it's improper. It's sort of, I don't even say it's improper. It's just it lacks a certain level of gravity to equate, to make the false equivalency between chattel slavery and wage slavery. I mean, it's just a different type of slavery. To have your
It's a 2.0 in my perspective. It's a refinement of the business model.
No doubt it is, but what I'm saying, and this is a very difficult intellectual sort of thing for people to come to grips with. There is the condition of one's mind, and then there's a condition of one's body. Not to say that they're separate, because they're actually not separate. That's a story. That's a scam that's been told to us. Mind, body, spirit. There ain't no mind, body, spirit. There's you.
A unity.
There's a unity, right? But with that being said, you can definitely predate on the two more than the other, right? Chattel slavery is certainly uh, a more physical slavery,
Well,
uh,
that would represent the evolution into a more
psychological,
intellectual,
which came,
technological,
which unironically,
industrial.
yes,
Yes, we
yes,
moved away from, as a world people, we've been moving away from a harmony with nature or a disharmony with nature. If your nature is you're a slave, I mean, but we just as an entire world people, we've given up a kind of connectivity to our unity and become over intellectualized, which is part of the process we're talking about.
right,
But when you got machines, it just was more efficient for the British figured out. This is an opinion, my story. And of course, what are these histories? These histories are stories. So you get a PhD after your name. Well, where did you learn your story? From another PhD. Where did he learn his story? From that PhD. And where did he learn his? Well, that guy was on the payroll of the British Crown in 1880. His name was Sir Francis Galton. So uh, who's controlling these stories really, requires us as American people to say, hey, what stories are we living by here? Because we're living by some bullshit stories, you know?
yeah.
And when the Industrial Revolution came, it was so much more efficient in the slavery, drugs, and piracy business model to set the slaves free and chain them to machines and let them work for them. Yeah, and there is a difference. There is a big difference, and I'm not trying to minimize it. However, when there's a hope for freedom and self-determination and pursuit of happiness, we've got some motivation.
Well,
You
yeah,
take that shit
no,
away. You take that away.
well,
Take away that.
let's talk about it though. Let's talk about it, because the most ominous thing that I see in our society today isn't racism or anti-Semitism. Certainly isn't sexism or homophobia or xenophobia or anything else. The most ominous cultural norm that I see creeping up in today's society is the willingness to accept the next evolution of industrialization, which is the fourth industrial revolution, and all technological advancement is a net positive sort of ideology. And it's it's dark because it actually makes the case for slavery.
And then
But
we're back into that Christ thing, judge not lest you be
it
judged.
makes the case for slavery because the only way you could explain why we've accepted this fourth industrial revolution or taken to it the way that we have, is because people didn't want to live on the land. They didn't want to live that way. There was something about technology that was so enticing, that was so seductive, that was so convenient, for lack of a better term. It was so convenient that people en masse around the entire world wanted it. And so in order and many people, this is the argument many people would make today. A lot of globalists, communists, technocrats, people who futurists, right? Tech people, people who want to go to this, post industrial society, or last industrial society, or whatever. The society that's going to lead us to eventually people putting their brains on computer chips and living, having their consciousness live for a million years until the chips run out. I don't know what they're going to do, but that type of person would make the argument that it's a form of slavery to send people back to a lifestyle where they have to live on the land. Why should people have to work that hard to survive? Why would they work that hard to survive on their own when we have machines? I mean, that is actually what they're saying.
That's what they're saying, and this is really the. I thought we were going in one direction. We've gone in a completely different direction, because this is really the fundamental question that human beings have to answer, like right now,
Mm-hmm.
today. This is not, and that's, and I've said this to you, and I've said it on my podcast.
Mm.
Everything that's going on is a distraction, so we as the American people can't consider the fundamental question: do we want to accept the evolution of technology? And it's based on the judgment that everything science has delivered is good, and that's a lie. It's a complete scam. That is and and then if you can even get to the point where you say, well, not everything is good, but if we don't do it, the North Koreans are going to do it.
Yeah.
If we don't do it, the Chinese are going to do it.
The
So
Iranians are going to do it.
we got to have a clone army.
Whoever.
Right. I mean, we're just we the people have become trapped in a set of judgments that have been constructed for us, and we're not really considering the life that we're going to leave for ourselves or for our children tomorrow.
Proto-technological paradigm. That's we're gridlocked in a proto-technological paradigm.
And there's just really small things that people can do to fight back against this if they believe that they should. Because I talk to people that think this is just dope. I mean,
Yeah.
I've
Walk up to, go
oh,
in Lunds, get your favorite, go to the produce section and pick up your favorite mango, touch it, feel it, see if it's ripe. I mean, just the perfect mango, and use your thumbprint to pay for it and get out of the store.
are they doing that at that store?
Whole Foods.
Oh, see, now we got two different. See, this is the thing that people can do. I've stopped going to stores that are implementing this technology. I've ripped up my credit cards. I'm carrying cash. I'm chopping my own wood. I'm growing food. I walk. It's not like we're going to reject all technology out of hand. We have to maintain our humanity in the face of this technological change. And this is something we have to search for, all of us, the whole culture. Nobody's going to control this culture. It's too big. We're choosing the judgments that are being laid out for us by experts.
Mm.
I think it was called the well-being checkup. I remember the name of this is in the 50s now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Leonard and Dr. Steinberg. I remember going for my well-being checkups with my mom. I didn't like it. I was being socialized. But we only had 3 vaccines. 1, 2, 3. We only had 3 television stations. 1, 2, 3. We had to go outside and play. There was nothing to do. There were no video games. The way we grew up in my generation is so.
Did you grow up in black and white?
Oh, yes.
No, I mean, was the real world in black and white?
Yes. Yes. It was a black and white world. I remember when I had my first dream in color.
No.
I had my first dream in color. I freaked out. So what's going on?
There's a funny story. The other day, me and my mom she was over my house, and we're sitting there on the couch, and we like to listen to music. That's our thing. We're connoisseurs of music and really good voices, right? So we're sitting there listening to music, and we're playing some 70s music, and I just asked my mom, I said, what was it like what was it like in the 70s? I mean, it just seems like it was a good time. Like the music gives you
Good vibe.
this feeling that it was a great time. I don't know what it was. I don't know what it is about certain time periods in history and the relics, the things that come out of them, such as music, but specifically music that is able to like um just kind of synthesize the quality of the time itself. I mean, when you hear 70s music, you can't help but feel good. I don't know what it is. And I listen to music from every era.
Can I tell you what it is? Would you
Okay, well,
like
one
to know?
second. Tell me one. I know what it is. I do know what it is.
You
You're right.
do?
Yeah.
Then you go
Yeah.
first when
Yeah.
you're ready.
Okay. But so I say, Mom, what was it like living in the 70s? Was it? She was like, I was like, what were you like 4, 5 in the 70s? She goes, Boy, what are you talking about? I was born in 67. I said, You were born during segregation. And she just, we're just crying, laughing. And I just started making these jokes. And I asked her, Was it black and white when you were growing up? And she was like, Yeah, no, the racial tensions were kind of high, and Martin Luther King had just died, and JFK was assassinated. I remember all of that stuff. Yeah, I was a little kid. I said, No, Mom, was it black and white outside in the real world? Like, was your entire life in black and white? Because for my generation, like when I was growing up, I remember thinking as a young kid, up until I was probably like 8 or 9, maybe, that when I looked at old movies or pictures from the old days where there wasn't color, that the real world was in black and white.
I told you I remember my first color dream. We had 3 black and white television stations. We were too poor to have a color television. They came in the '60s, but we had black and white into the mid '70s at my house.
Yeah.
My father was a professor. They didn't pay him a lot of money back then. But I think it's important because I know this is a younger audience.
Yeah.
We have to understand.
No, you got the young audience. I got the boomers.
You got boomers?
I got a lot of boomers.
Do you really?
Of course. Boomers love me. I don't know what it is. I love the boomers.
You know what? I think I know part of it.
That's why I hang out with you.
Because you act like you're from the '70s.
That's probably right.
Maybe that's because of the professional athletic career, but there's a no bullshit side to you that people my age kind of can appreciate because there's some other cohorts in your age group that if you push on them a little too hard, they start to cry. And for my generation, it's like, okay, I'm old enough now to be gentle. But if I was just a little younger, I'd push on these motherfuckers to make them cry for sport. But I'm older now. I mellowed out. But I think it's important. And I think if you have a boomer audience, they're going to relate to this. We had World War II, huge bloodletting. The United States came out of it large and in charge, immediately got caught up in Korea, which was another huge bloodletting.
Mm-hmm.
Military industrial complex grew like a mushroom. We had the McCarthy era, which was in many respects kind of like this era we're going right now with people getting canceled and people being suppressed for what they believe. In the '60s came, we had those 4 martyrs right away, John Kennedy and then Malcolm and Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy happened boom, 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 boom. But we had the Civil Rights Act of 1965. And we had the first cohort of people that grew up integrated in the schools was mine. I can remember the names of all the black people that came by bus into my elementary school because it was a novel deal. One day they were there, the day before they were not there.
Mm.
And one of those guys, Reggie Cameron, and I became best friends because, hey, this Hebrew thing goes back a ways. But in the '70s, which your mom and you were enjoying that music, the Vietnam War ended in '73. There was no draft. The country just had enough of militarism. Had enough. Had enough with people like Nixon. There was a moment where people were just completely depressed by those assassinations and the threat of nuclear war. So you know what people said? They said, fuck it.
We're going to get high.
I'm going to listen to the Commodores.
We're going to have sex.
And go disco.
And we're going to listen to great music.
That's exactly right.
And we're going to get high some more and have sex.
That's correct.
And listen to great music.
That's right.
Sex, drugs, and
rock and roll.
Rock and roll.
And, it was a very together kind of a time. You could go to a club and the club was integrated and people were not at odds with each other. There was actually a moment of
racial harmony.
Well, at least
I hear that from my grandparents, the people who grew up in St. Paul. You grew up in St. Paul. That's another reason why we get along so well. we're from St. Paul. No, not throwing shade on Minneapolis, but St. Paul's a different place. You guys can debate that if you want to in the chat or wherever you may be listening. I'm a St. Pauler, but um, in St. Paul, the communities were very integrated, were mixed up, and my grandmother and her friends and my grandfather, I mean, the racism stuff still existed, but I mean, if my grandfather and my grandmother's interracial relationship is any example, I mean, my grandmother wasn't white, but on face value, on appearance, she would look white to most people. She's actually half black, half Norwegian. The Norwegian genes won out because she's much more lighter, fair skinned than you are, but her dad was darker than I am. Um, so it's interesting to hear that there was a time of racial harmony right after segregation and the
I'm
Civil
not
Rights
gonna call
Act.
it harmony. I'm gonna call it an attempt at reconciliation. There was a conscious attempt.
Neutrality, that a better word?
No, there was people, lots of people. It wasn't just me. It was widespread. It was driven by the music, by the party, by the rejection of the military-industrial complex, by the rejection of war, by the rejection of nuclear weapons. It brought people together in a way that was unprecedented. And the people that saw this happening went right to work on making sure it didn't last very long because it was dangerous to the status quo.
Mm.
It was a people's movement. It was a people's movement. And it was, we had it from 73 until Nancy Reagan.
War on drugs.
War on drugs. That's right. We had, then all of a sudden, the black community was demonized as being sexually undisciplined and drug addled and uneducated, and families were. Why were the families breaking down? Federal policy. That's why.
Right.
But they blame black people for federal policy. And I guess you could say, if you want to be really extreme about it, you could blame black people for federal policy because all black people have to do is go be delegates. And in one election cycle, this whole thing could
To
change.
be overrepresented in policymaking.
I would think every black person in the United States of America would go be a delegate of one of these parties and change these parties.
Yeah, but they have that sort of nihilism, and that's it's not unrelated to the what I want to get to, the obviously the war in Palestine and Israel, because that's what people are really interested in, and it's good to have your perspective, being somebody who's of the Jewish cultural identity. But I've been giving my my sounding off on it for the last 3 days. But people are so nihilistic, and that's beneath all of these wedge issues, beneath all of the black and white. I said yesterday on my podcast, the establishment benefits from us viewing things through a two outcome framework. Things are either this way or that way, and they're very good at setting the stage to benefit either way. Right? They're very good at absorbing the momentum. They're flexible and adaptive to benefit no matter how things happen. And people, we just don't think like that. I mean, you can see the brainwashing. You can see the sort of dichotomous schism of the modern human mind is just, I got to have it one way or another. There's no nuance. I can't take nuance. There's like an allergic rejection of nuance
Can I tell a
itself.
quick story?
Yeah, please.
It's off the. It's
Go
off
ahead.
the. It's a sidebar.
Please.
Sidebar.
We got all day.
Your Honor, sidebar, please.
Okay.
I was a young man when rap started,
Yeah.
and it was not an easy thing for the society to uptake because it was quite a militant art form. And like 2 or 3 years after rap started, because I like music and I play music, so I was into early rap. I'm still into it. Again, I like to work out to it. And I'm in an elevator. I'm in an elevator, and they're playing rap music on the Muzak in the elevator. And I thought, son of a bitch, these people 3 years or 4 years after the establishment of this new art form, they were already incorporating it into Muzak. I mean, that's what you're saying about the masters of the psychological are very good at adapting to cultural change and co-opting it very quickly.
Yeah, they're parasites. That's what they are. And, that's not some would say, oh, that's an anti-Semitic because the Jews are running the music industry. And wasn't making a specific comment about the rap music itself.
I didn't take it that way. Isn't that strange?
But I just know how people think because I'm in tune with the dialogue like that. People are fucking nuance conversation has become a lost sort of in priority. What I was saying was the people who are smart enough, who are clever enough to adapt to any situation, to always come out as the superior benefactor, the superior group, the superior individual, the power broker, the benefactor of cultural change. There's a sort of parasitic nature to that, and it's not just Jewish people. The black bourgeoisie. Oh, the black bourgeoisie are the greatest at it. I mean, it doesn't get no better than the black bourgeoisie. And if you go back to my earliest days in the podcast, I'm more critical of the Jada Pinkett Smiths than I ever am of the Larry Finks. Now, Larry Fink is a much bigger detriment to society than Jada Pinkett is, but as a black man, I kind of feel that immediate wound from how black women have been used, eh,
Weaponized.
weaponized against black men, and kind of become another linchpin of globalism at a different level, of a
Oh,
different variety.
let me stick my neck on the chopping block.
Okay.
It would be Jewish women, American Jewish women,
Mm,
because they are hegemonically, not hegemonically, because there's religious Jewish women, but
mm,
the modern Jewish family structure is liberal, leftist, because of the activities of, shall we say, the Know Nothings and the Whigs and the anti-immigrant parties, and it was
hmm
the Democrat Party that opened their arms to the Jewish people after World War II. Yeah. But abortion is such an important issue for Jewish women because it's a rejection of their what they perceive to be a second-class status within traditional Judaism.
Say that again.
Abortion is a very important issue in Jewish families and for Jewish women because before this modern era, Jewish women in a traditional Orthodox family religious structure were subordinated.
Right.
They weren't even
Right.
allowed to sit with their husbands or their sons in the synagogue up front by the holy books. They sat in back behind something called a mechitza, which was a curtain, because the men weren't supposed to look at them, lest they lose their focus on God and focus on earthly matters. And I have to say, there's some wisdom in that, right?
Yeah. Radical.
It's radical.
That's a radical faith practice. Eh?
Well, but so is having a priest that is celibate for the same reason. Is it similar reasons?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it's very close, which is why, Catholics, Jews, I don't know, in St. Paul is just kind of a thing where if you're Catholic, we just joke that you're Jewish,
It's not a joke.
it's
It's
not really a
not a
joke.
joke.
But what's funny about it is when you get deep enough into this current political culture, you start to hear that people have an animus towards Catholics and Catholicism, very similar to that.
Oh, what a
The
surprise!
the
What a
anti yeah
surprise!
yeah the anti Catholicism is just as prominent in common conversation as anti Jewish.
It's come from the
Right.
same people.
Yeah.
It's the,
Well,
it's the same rut.
it is. But the funny thing is you get a lot of black people who are LARPing as Nazis in that way.
I've run into some of those people in the live
Mm.
chat
Oh, yeah.
here.
Yeah, black guys who are,
Well, I don't know that they're
the
black.
Jews, the Jews, the Jews.
There's just and I want to say this since I'm here with you.
hmm
I try to.
They're not the risk. I got to say it again because we're an hour in. People sometimes jump on the podcast whenever. And we got some time. We got a ton of hard drive space, and we got to get into this Israel Palestine thing. But I got to say again because it's a very popular current cultural sort of narrative. Who were the original Jews? Who are the real Jews? The only claim you can make about people not being real Jews or not being real Christians or not being real Muslims or whatever the case may be is if they reject the fundamental cornerstone of that faith tradition, which is why when I was on Jason Whitlock, which is probably a dangerous thing to say right now given the current events in the world, but talked about people who I call anti-Jews. You people are anti-Jewish, and I don't mean that to be funny or to be, harsh.
Well, we started talking about that, if you remember.
But you're anti. If you reject, you can't say you're a thing. You're an identity, and the cornerstone of that identity is based on
Faith in God.
a faith tradition, and you reject the faith tradition but carry on the identity. That doesn't work, and it's different than race in that way because you know uh, if I'm black skinned, first of all, we could get into the whole race scam too, because that's kind of a Darwin thing to begin with as well. And if you wanted to go that deep, okay, there's only one race, the human race. I get it, but race is a different thing because it's amenable. It's an unamenable characteristic. It's an unamenable character trait, right? I mean, I could say I'm not black, but doesn't I
You
could
might as well say you're a pony.
I could reject black people altogether. I could say, hey, I don't believe in black people. I don't believe in blackness. It doesn't matter what I do. I'd still be black.
Well, you would be for the people that are truly racist.
But I couldn't say. But what I couldn't say is, I'm a Christian, but I don't believe in Christ. If I'm a Christian and don't believe in Christ, I'm not a Christian.
Now we're talking about culture.
Right.
Culture has many elements to it. It has beliefs and histories and key people and rituals and holidays, costuming. And then there's these, what the anthropologists call the fundamentals. So if you're going to be Jewish and you say, I'm Jewish, and you don't believe in God, you're actually anti-Jewish because the characteristic of being Jewish is subservience to God. So if you're going to say, I don't believe in God, you're saying, not only do I not believe in him, but I'm not subservient to him. You're in a completely different track. But it's so convenient for people to hold on to all the food and the cultural histories.
Everything but the self-sacrifice.
Every-
Everything but the submission.
Everything but the fundamental.
Right.
And that's
The cornerstone.
Yeah, it's like, what are you doing? I mean, come on. And we're calling this out now, which is going to risk deplatforming, but it has to be called out because I'm going to say, as a Jewish person, I am subservient to God. So I am offended when people go off about issues that they know nothing about and they have no care to know about them because they view my faith as making me into some kind of a savage. And they view themselves as being developed beyond savagery.
So you're talking about other Jewish people.
I'm talking about other Jewish people.
Yeah.
Or other people that when we gather around the campfire.
Well, and that's what I meant. And before we go into this Palestine-Israel thing, I think it's important to set the stage or set the conversation in a way where, yes, there are schisms between people politically. There are schisms between people socially, racially, psychologically, academically, philosophically, historically, economically. I mean, the number of divisions you could play on are almost infinite. They
could be infinite.
They could be
theoretically.
Infinite. Theoretically,
yes.
They could be infinite. The tops of them, what has risen to the top of them in many ways, at least per the narrative, per the mainstream narrative, that is extremely secular. Let's remind people. The mainstream media industrial complex, especially the liberal mainstream media industrial complex, but as I listen, the media industrial complex that comes into play all around the world is quite secular.
I would go a little farther. I would say it's anti-Christian and anti-Jewish and anti-Muslim, anti-faith.
It's anti-religious.
Anti-belief in God.
Right.
Because it's a scientifically Darwinist-based worldview.
Okay, so with that being said, it's strange. All the divisions, all the multitude of divisions that we can name, that the faith divisions always seem to rise to the top, and they end up making it center stage. I don't think that's by accident.
Go a little farther. What do you mean by that? For example?
I just mean, like here in America, we had the Me Too movement, right? We had the xenophobia. We have people who deny elections. We have people who deny or who are skeptical of vaccines. We have people who are anti-establishment, anti-government, who are anti-elitism. We have all these sort of, cultural divisions here in our own country from a cultural standpoint, right? Somehow, though, that anti-God thing, that Christian thing, that belief in God thing is still at the root of it. And I think it's something that validates the importance, the profundity, the value of faith in God and faith tradition. Is for some reason that's the thing that people want to attack.
Yeah,
And
because
we have to,
everybody wants to be close to God.
but even more so, I think when we go to talk about divisions, we can separate out the politics, the economic, we can separate out the social, we can separate out all these different things if we're willing to sit down long enough and have a nuanced conversation to do so. But the God piece is something that you have to look at as being significant, not only if you believe in God, but just the historical significance of this thing always rises to the top. They'll use that as a negative, a counter negative. They'll say, yeah, religion is always the reason why people go to kill each other, and they use that as a justification to denounce
Religion.
religion.
Yeah.
I'm saying in the reverse way, that there is something that's trying to be sorted out in religious faith tradition, that people are quick to talk about, but also quicker to suppress, like right now.
Well, I said, everyone wants to be close to God. Well, obviously that's not true because a lot of people don't believe in God. But the different groups historically, or I've said many times, I think I've said this to you, war, all wars. Do you believe in God or do you not believe in God?
Mm.
And if you believe in God, how do you believe in God? And to me, I see that in every war, particularly in this particular conflict right here.
There's real Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, it's really both groups are alleged to believe in God. That's their cloth that they wrap themselves in, and they hate each other. So who's closer to God? Everyone wants that superiority that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Even like the black community, the Jewish community,
Mm-hmm.
Palestinian community. Everybody's laying a claim to their specialness, to their relationship to the spiritual, and we're competing about this like little children killing each other. Oh, mommy, daddy, do you like me more than Royce? It's really kind of tragic, really. The competition amongst cultures,
Yeah.
because at one level, and I'm just thinking about this for the first time, so if I don't get it out with articulateness, please excuse me. At one level, it's about being close to God or having the essential truth. Our religion is the truth, and yours is a myth, and it goes right into Darwinism. Because if ours is the truth and yours is a myth, well, then
We have the right to kill you.
that's exactly correct because you're really not correct. They're saying, and that's what was the most
You're
concerning
not
thing.
being correct is
A
equal
grounds for
for you not to exist.
ethnic cleansing. And I think this is what we're seeing, and this is what's so horrifying to me as a Jew who's subservient to God. And I know it's changed over the last few days, but there was a minute there for, right after those brutal slayings in southern Israel,
Mm-hmm.
where it was like, these people are all getting together and saying, it's time to clip the Palestinians. Like, there's agreement, broad social agreement.
Explain.
Well, I mean,
Now this is controversial for you. I could see our episode getting pulled down from YouTube just because you say this. I know what you're going to say.
well, I'm just
But
going
go
to
ahead.
I'm just going to say it from
Say
the
it.
perspective of being Jewish. As a Jewish man, the Nazis believed that for the good of the German people, European Jewry had to be destroyed. Hitler made one promise before the war. He didn't promise to beat the Russians. He didn't promise to beat the French. He said that if a war breaks out in Europe caused by Jewish financial interests, so to speak, he promised that European Jewry would be destroyed. That's the only promise he made, and he kept his promise. He said, if this happens, European Jewry will be destroyed. On the 10th of September, a full month before these horrible events happened, the head of the Israeli Mossad, a man named David Barnea, which you can go see this on YouTube, it's up there, it's in Hebrew, you might have to get a translator. He said that the time had come for the Iranian regime to lose its immunity, that if there was any further killing of Jews or Israelis by Iranian proxies, by Iranians, by Iranian weapons, that the Israeli establishment was going to kill the Iranian leadership. That was a month before this one went down. So he laid down the predicate that said, if then. Then this thing happened where there was this tremendous brutality and barbarism, which is its own kind of language, which is another reason I could get clipped off. Because, when people act mentally ill, we can say, oh, that person's crazy. Unless you really sit down and look at their craziness, because their craziness is a message. There's a message in this. And I meant to say this earlier. We're talking about the nihilism of black people in the community. There's a nihilism. You said, did I get that right?
Yeah.
You said there was a nihilism?
Yeah, the nihilism is sort of we don't have any real power or dominance in the political. The problem I have with it is that it's a nihilism that's self-loathing, but it's also self-deceptive because their argument is we don't have the levers of power. We've never had the levers of power. We will never have the levers of power. So why participate? Well, number one, it's not true that you've never had the levers of power. It's just that all the people who get up high enough to have their hands on the levers sell you out. And then you look away from them selling you out so that you could pretend like you're having some forward movement just to not participate in the end. It's a weird kind of merry-go-round they go on, but
Well,
for another day.
I just want to say that the nihilism that's associated with this Hamas action, which is, I agree, it's horrifying, terrible.
Yeah.
It does have a message, and its message is you people in the world are moving beyond us. The Saudis are making peace with the Israelis. The Indians are making peace in a business corridor with the UAE and Saudi and Israel into Europe, and the Chinese are backing the Iranians. And there's this thing happening here.
Oh, the Saudis and the Iranians are in the BRICS together.
And guess what? The Palestinians are saying, these sons of bitches are writing us out of the future. We're getting sold out. We don't have our hands on the lever of power. We're not ever going to have our hands on the lever of power. And if that's the way it's going to be, we're all going to die. That's real nihilism. And that's a message for us, for those of us that have the desire to look at the messages that are being sent, to have the courage to look at that. And it's hard to look at because it's a terrible message. What they're saying is, we're all going to die together. If you're going to deny us our human rights, if you're going to deny us our history, if you're going to absolutely marginalize us, we're killing everybody. We're taking you all with us. And there was this moment that was so terrifying for me. It was like the whole world had a lock that said, you know what? These sons of bitches got to go. And then Netanyahu's going on, we're going to kill every Hamas fighter. And here we are today. And of course, the Arab world is now rising in response to this.
Mm-hmm.
So how far are we going to go with this? Are we going to have a world-sanctioned ethnic cleansing? And if you take a look at the pictures of the
I'd say, and this is how the great Satan always plays, both sides of the coin.
When you say the great Satan, is that a political statement or a theological statement?
A little bit of both.
I was afraid you were going to say that. Oh, we're going to get deep now.
No. What I'm saying is, when the way Satan plays is on both sides of the football, and yes, in one sense, the sort of conventional post-World War II democratic liberal order, liberal neocon edifice from here to Beijing, and it is from here to Beijing, towards the middle of the aisle, towards the center of the political spectrum, would come together and say, hey, rules-based order, law and order, we have to have order, we have to have safety and security, and anybody who's a little too radical that threatens that, we should just get rid of them all. We can justifiable homicide, justifiable genocide. We could see that playing out. But the flip side of the coin, which makes this so dark, so dangerous, so tough to talk about, and not to be lukewarm or straddle the fence, because I'm not straddling the fence, but the flip side of that is there is an element of Islam. There is an element of the Muslim faith that is naturally more violent, that is naturally more committed to barbarism and atrocity in the name of God. I mean, you can just read it. It's just that's not conjecture. Now, there's people who misappropriate the Quran, just like there were people who misappropriate the Bible and people who misappropriate, the Jewish writings, and
Declaration of Independence.
there's people who misappropriate the Bill of Rights. Absolutely. But what you can see brewing up here is, again, the stupidity of the common man. And I don't mean to call common people stupid, like deplorables, like Hillary Clinton. I don't mean it that way. The brainwashing of the common man to favor a two outcome framework and not see that the establishment is sophisticated enough, is big enough, is secret enough, is mighty enough to absorb the momentum of any outcome. And in this situation, yes, we could green light a genocide, which would be moral hazard. It would scar the human spirit, just like World War II did. Not just because of the Holocaust, but because of the war in general. 75 million deaths. If you don't believe that scars the human spirit or has wounds on the human spirit, you got a problem. But in the other direction, from the leftist perspective, now the Muslims become a part of an anti-colonial, anti-Western narrative by proxy, by default, where in other case, the Muslims were not. The Muslims traditionally are not in alignment with these cultural leftists, globalists, Marxists. I mean, I know that, and we should talk about that because there are some people who make the case that Zionism and Islam are two forms of Marxism because along the way, the Islamic world became proto-communist in many respects, certainly in Africa and some countries, but also
Well, that's a
in Arab.
very interesting.
But before you go,
That's interesting.
I,
That's an interesting comment you're making.
I want you to go off on that if you can. But my point is, we're looking at two scenarios that if they shake a certain way, who benefits? Cui bono, right? I mean, I look at it, and that's why I've been trying to caution my audience, and I hope that YouTube would be gracious enough to understand that we're having a very middle of the road conversation, but not middle of the road that we're straddling the fence and denying the possibility or the presence of evil and conspiracy, because there is that. But just generally to say that there's a road we're on, and drifting off either way could have you off in a ditch. And yeah, genocide against the Palestinians would be terrible, but this sort of affectation and green light of radical, chaotic, sort of unstructured rebellion from the Muslim world, manifested in hatred and barbarism, is also a problem. Does that make me Nikki Haley? I think I'm the exact opposite.
I think what we're trying to do.
I mean, does that make me Cornel West? You know what I mean? Because there's a part of the centrist moderate that is trying to say that, but you just know that they're not saying it for that reason. They're saying it because they want to keep stealing coins from under the table. I'm saying it as a genuine intellectual.
We're trying to explore the judgments that are around this problem in a way that people don't flip out. I've been finding in my own world that I say things to people that I expect we're going to have a dialogue, and I've tripped one of their triggers, and their dialogue's over.
Yeah.
Because this is so fraught with thousands of years. This goes back all the way to the Old Testament. This goes back to the nature of what it is to be an Arab and to be a Jew. It is an identity issue. And there's hard feelings here. Now I'm going to just make a comment. I hope this doesn't get us thrown off. Your average street player living in Jordan or living in Syria or living in Iraq or Iran knows a whole hell of a lot more about this history than American Jews or Americans in general. I had a very good friend of mine, someone someone we both respect, someone we like, a badass. I mean, we respect this guy. Called maybe go. It's almost, for those of us who are old enough to remember Saturday Night Live in the 70s, Emily Latella. He goes, "What's all this about Pakistanis and Israelis?" I said, "What did you just say?" He said, "What's going on with the Pakistanis?" I said, No, it's not Pakistanis. It's Palestinians." And what he should have said was, "Never mind." But he didn't. We actually did not really understand this history or what was going on. And this is an educated, successful, sentient being who, for whatever reason, Maybe because he lives in Texas. Has nothing to do with him. My name is Paul, and it's between you all. I really don't give a shit about what you all doing over there. Just let me pump oil.
Some wisdom in that.
Well, there is some
to say
wisdom.
the least,
There
but
is.
continue.
Well, I mean, it brings up.
I admire that. I actually envy that level of
Not giving a shit
not
about
giving a shit, yeah.
because really, this is what it is for me as an American Jew. I've spent probably 40 podcasts really critical of Tom Emmer here, CD6, House Majority Whip, and the way he sold that scam of a debt ceiling bill and the funding for the Ukraine. I've been very critical of it because I know our country is broke. We're broke. And we're spending money now in the Ukraine. Now we got a new front, this Middle East thing. We can't afford this. We have the illusion of affording it because we're not paying attention. Going back to who benefits from the country going broke? Because we're broke. We can't afford it even if we want to. So what we have at a base level, we have the American people thinking we're going to fight 2 or 3 wars simultaneously and life's not going to change. Well, I'm very sorry. We're not living in 2005. It's guns or butter. Pick and live with your decision. And if we back up this gunplay, we're going to live by the sword and die by the sword. That's just the way it is. We don't have to be involved. We're talking about this friend of ours. He said, what is this all about? This has nothing to do with me. American Jews can't say that because our identities are tied up in the nation of Israel, not understanding where the nation of Israel came from. And who was in charge of Palestine in 1948?
The Romans.
In 1948.
The Crown.
The Crown.
Which is an extension of Club Rome. Sorry.
So
that's conspiracy theory.
But I mean,
go ahead.
but in not conspiracy, the Zionists went to the British government, the Balfour Declaration.
Mm-hmm.
It was a agency of British foreign policy, not some kind of thing like, oh, the Jews need a homeland. No, they had some kind of foreign policy aims that fit into all the rest of their aims. I don't like any of their aims.
Only 70 years. And it's also worth it to note that the early Israelis, the early people in the area actually fought against the Crown too. There was genuine rebellion.
Well, there was a double cross there, and we had 2 groups, the Irgun and the Stern gang. They actually called them a gang. They were terrorists. In fact, some Israeli prime ministers formerly were terrorists. It's like if these guys that did these deeds ended up being the president of Palestine. Mm-hmm. That's what actually happened. Jews don't want to hear that. They don't know the history of Deir Yassin or the atrocities, or that there was Count Bernadette, who was the UN designated negotiator between the sides, was assassinated by Jewish terrorist groups. I mean, they don't want none of that happened. But the British reversed course because they had a lot of chips down with the Arab side, and they started to suppress the Arabs, and they started restricting Jewish immigration. And the Jews the radical terrorists among that population.
Who restricted Jewish immigration? The Crown.
The Crown did.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But then the Jews started flooding from Europe anyway.
Because it was post-World War II, and it was changing the facts on the
ground.
Well,
even before that, they started.
We could say that this was the beta test of using immigration to change a polity.
Explain.
Well, we have a border right now. We have all these people coming over.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to be quite organized with United Nations, sponsored NGOs, and the government's helping. And it's important because these people are oppressed and their countries are collapsed, and they do need to be Americans because where they are is not working for them. So our borders open, they're coming here in huge numbers. Well, that's exactly what happened with the Jewish people after World War II. The Jewish population right after World War II increased by tenfold.
Isn't it cool? I mean, let's just pause for a moment. Pick that back up in a moment. I don't want to distract you too much. But isn't it just a testament of the Jewish tradition that the Jews came out of Israel 2,000 years ago, and wherever they went, they survived. The identity survived to the point where they actually could come back to a homeland. I mean, if you ask black people here in America to go back to wherever it was they came from, they couldn't give you one place. I mean, the furthest most of us could get back to the slave plantation, and there is kind of an indignity that was done to us by taking away a man's history and a man's culture in that way and leaving them
That's the
suspended
difference between chattel slavery.
and psychological wage slavery.
Yeah,
That is the difference.
That's a very critical difference.
It is a
The
very critical
stripping of a
difference.
man's
The
identity.
stripping of a man's identity.
And
Absolutely.
we didn't think, because we were talking about chains and,
Yeah.
but really,
Well, I mean, it's
that's how they stripped it, was with physical.
You know, look. Yes and no. Yes and no. And I'm not here to say I'm not going to Ron DeSantis controlled opposition. Slavery did you some good. I mean, that's ridiculous. But in the final intellectual and most importantly spiritual analysis of it, our home is with God. Our culture, our history is with God. Our identity is with God as Christians. Them speaking to my Christians, you know, if you're a black atheist out there and you want to Marcus Garvey on back to the Ivory Coast, hey, proceed. Wouldn't recommend it. Dangerous waters out there, but hey, everybody freedom, free will. God gave it to you.
Can I just ask a question that's
But what I was
provocative? I might
okay,
provocative
yeah, go ahead.
on this line.
Yeah.
I've heard many Christian commentators,
Mm-hmm.
for lack of a better description, say that it was a positive for blacks to be enslaved because they were exposed to Christianity. And I just like to delve into that a little bit.
No,
Not going to do it.
no, I can't go there.
Hey, I tried to set you up, okay?
I can't. Hey. I can't do it. It's my
Strike that. We're going to strike that.
You know, I'm kind of radical. You know, kind of like a Zionist in that way, right? When I defend that line like that, but I mean it. The reason I, well, you know,
Hey, you know what? You've set me up a couple times. I got to come back, okay?
but what I'm saying is, no, I reject that piece because one of the fundamental tenets of Christianity is ministry, is to spread the gospel. And so, in effect, the gospel could have been spread without
I
slavery.
wanted you to say that because that is why modern Jewish people of my cohort have a really hard time with this, because they haven't accepted or heard the gospel.
Mm.
And you can't really understand your identity as a believer. This is my view, and of course, I'm going to get hammered for this, but for the Jewish people that have found Christ, it's much easier for them to deal with their identity because their identity is purely about their relationship with God. Jewish people are a tribe. It's a communal religion. There is no approaching God directly. Can't do it.
Got to go through the Godhead.
It's an infamia to
Mhm.
say, I have a relationship with God. You have a relationship with 10 other men, warriors. You're praying together, and it's a communal activity. Christ came and said, hey, the hierarchy of temple Judaism is corrupt. That is a corrupt status quo. First for the Jew, now for the Gentile, and I will send you a comforter. God will live within you. That was a radical transformation of Judaism. That was done for Jews. That was spoken and ministered by Christ to Jews. The giving of the Holy Ghost.
It was to take the
To destroy the status
monopoly on
quo.
the God. It was to take the monopoly on the
Yes.
Godhead away from the temple,
Yes.
the corrupt temple.
The corrupt status quo, he completely overturned it. The overturning of the tables of the money changers, that was metaphor.
So it was political and spiritual.
It was.
It was a political statement made about spiritual matters.
I'll introduce you to my mom sometime. When the Jewish tribe, political and spiritual is the same thing, because all of these religions were political.
Well, the reason I say that is because one of the things that's become very prominent in the black community, especially in the black Protestant Christian community, is to disassociate themselves with all matters of politics, as though politics and spirituality run completely,
That happens in the white Protestant community too. That,
yeah.
and you know what actually happens?
It's how a Protestant country became overrun and overturned and run by Satanists.
When the most religious people turn their back on the secular and don't go and be delegates and bring their faith and their integrity into the political process, we could say it's a separation of church and state, right?
Scam.
It's a total scam. Look where we're at. All you have
Satanists run the country, and now they're going to give you moral platitudes, moral pontifications about what our duty is to human rights, and they're erecting statues of Lilith out there in California, and you'll have California congressmen and women on both sides of the aisle come to you and pontificate about our moral duty to Israel. Not only are they taking the Lord's name in vain by making the claim for Israel's nationhood status on the basis of God's covenant with the Jews, they're taking the Lord's name in vain by using America, a nation that was founded on Christian principle, to then use our military might to go defend that country.
we're coming around because we started out
I mean, it's like
about,
a quadruple down in heresy, right?
We started talking about the Jews being used, and you said, stop. Let's stay on for a while. But how are we being used? I know for a fact that support for the Ukraine war was waning. It was waning because, first of all, the Ukrainians are not winning, and Americans like a winner. So in the great game of life, the Ukrainians were not getting the progress done. So the money's drying up, right? Well, who's really benefiting here? It would be the military-industrial complex. So now a new conflict has come up, which does lay a moral claim on the people. The people are being used. The beneficiaries of this are the people that are selling the weapons. And if you really believe in God, I mean, if you really are subservient to God, there is a right to self-protect.
Yeah.
There's righteous things that people have to do in their lives. But we're living in a empire that is now going to take the Ukrainian money and the Israel money and put it together in $100 billion bill, and it's going to sail right on through the Congress, and there's no control of the spending until January 2nd, 2025, as long as the spending is for killing people.
Explain.
The debt ceiling bill, which was passed about 4 months ago, which was widely touted by Kevin McCarthy, and this is why Matt Gaetz deposed him, as the greatest cut in American history, was a complete BS story. And I want to apologize to my listeners and viewers. I was talking about this in my last podcast, and I was kind of riffing, and I couldn't even get the words out. I actually screwed it up because the total cut, the maximum cut when this is all over, is $800 million. It's nothing on a $6.7 trillion budget. And I actually couldn't say, so it's $800 billion. No, it's $800 million. That's it. And that's where we're going to go to. They're going to cut $800 million off of $6.7 trillion, and they have an unlimited runway by what's already passed into law to spend as much on these wars as they want to. They could spend $50 trillion.
Into deficit, you mean?
Yes. They'll just run it. And this is why.
As long as they cut $800 million off.
On the discretionary spending side.
Right.
But as far as the military goes, hey, it's let it rip. And Gaetz stood in the well of the Congress and talked about the chaos of the debt was what we need to focus on. And they've called him a sexually undisciplined, drug snorting, arrogant, wrath-based, and all these
self-absorbed, celebrity, attention-seeking,
anti-Semite. They call him a racist, an anti-Semite, a homophobe, a xenophobe. Just whatever we got to do. Let's just
the only man that would stand up in the well and actually talk about how lobbying has hollowed out the Capitol Hill, and he's the one who gets all of the criticism. Tells you a lot about our. I promise you. Listen, I've seen a lot of things in my life. I pay attention to a lot of things. I don't think I was moved, and this is why I wrote the article this is why I wrote the letter to the Congress, the open letter to the Congress on my Substack. I don't think I was more infuriated by a moment I remember in political history. Like, if I went back and looked at a few moments ex post facto, I probably would have a different emotion. But I mean, in the moment, like organically right there in the moment, I don't think I've ever been as mad as hearing those other congressmen and women boo Matt Gaetz for talking about special interests in lobbying. I've never been so upset in the moment for any political thing I've ever listened to. That was one of the most disgusting there should be special there should be primaries, there should be constituent outrage, there should be protests. There should be protests, peaceful protests in Washington D.C. every day from now until the election in 2024 for the simple fact that those congressmen and women booed Matt Gaetz for talking about special interests and lobbying. I never seen anything like it. It was one of the most disgusting moments in American history. It just showed you how sold out America has become to black money, to crony capitalism and special interests. Is disgusting.
We have a uni party. There's not two parties. We have the illusion of choice. We got a small group of people, 8 people in the Congress that had the moral integrity to stand up for the American people. Because the American people don't understand what's coming. Nobody understands because it's going to be unprecedented. And we just can't keep spending this money like this.
And now and what you were saying is now this war gives us the
green light. Green light.
Israel.
Right. I mean,
because who cares about Ukraine really? I mean, a few progressive Western Atlanticist Davos ideologues still married to this NATO strategy, anti-Russia,
use the Ukrainian identity to knock the Russians down.
But even so, who really cares about the Ukrainians? I mean, that's a cultural reality that the power brokers of military and war on the global stage had to deal with.
It wasn't a good enough sales job.
It wasn't a good enough
Not a good enough pitch.
Yeah, because black people were pissed.
Like, what is this?
Well, what are we talking about? Well, and not only black people, but Democrats were starting to get pissed too. Everybody was starting to get pissed.
You know, I have a line for this. I hesitate to use it. Maybe you can edit it out if it's too much.
Okay.
They played the Jew card.
Okay.
They did.
Who did?
The power structure at if you believe. You
talking about because of Zelensky?
I'm talking about because of this war.
You're talking about right now, not the Ukraine.
Right. To get the money to fund the machine, to keep this thing moving forward. We both saw that thing from CNN with Aaron Burkett where she was saying, you can't cut funding to the Ukraine. It's going to eliminate U.S. jobs.
Right.
Remember that?
That was horrifying.
I mean, really. I mean,
war for jobs.
And all the viewers.
Oh, I had somebody say the other day, I would much rather send my money to help fight and defend Israel than the Ukraine. Now that's kind of the narrative is.
That's what I'm saying.
There's a better choice for us to send our money to for our national interests in the Eurasian.
And the judgments
landmass.
are so intense. It's so hard to talk about it. People get so pissed. I mean, you just push on it a little bit, and that's the end of it. And I'm going to tell you, I'm fully subservient to God. I am a Jew. I love the Jewish people, but my identity is as an American. I was talking about this on the Professor Penn podcast, and I think it's very important for the Jews that are listening to think, please, I'm asking you, instead of hating me, think about this. Think about how embarrassed you are for being an American Jew, and you have cousins or aunts and uncles that are living in Israel, and they've been risking their lives your entire life. You've known you got a cousin living on the West Bank carrying an Uzi. You know it. And you always kind of felt you didn't feel good about yourself because you knew that you were avoiding that fight. You're over here in America enjoying the peace and the prosperity, the rule of law. Life was good. And you have family members over there that are risking their lives every day.
Mm.
And we had so much, as a people, guilt about that. And it occurs to me, and I want to say this to people who are listening, that this could be meaningful. There's a reason why your ancestors immigrated to America instead of immigrating to Israel. They chose, for lack of a better term, circumcision of the heart. They chose certain unalienable rights. They did not choose to involve themselves in a forever war that's been going on from 48, then a war in 52, then a war in 67, then a war in 73, a war in 81. Those Jews that went there signed on to a lifetime of war. And the Jews that came to America signed on to the promises of our Constitution. And I think it's time for people to accept and to delve into those judgments and realize we have an American identity. We're part of an American community, and our faithfulness, our Jewishness within America could lead to a different kind of identity if we could unmoor ourselves from what? The fear of extinction, the fear of genocide. Because that's what happens inside the camp. Hey, we better stick together because, and this is the truth, you could be a non believer and be a Jew, and be a Jew wearing side curls with a black hat, and they'll kill you the same. So this is a very complicated issue in here. And we can keep talking about it because I think the key is to
the
keep
multitude of division, even within and without.
we got to deal with it. I mean, why would we go through such a horrible time in world history and in American history and get nothing out of it? Let's get something out of it as a people where we actually have the courage to look at the judgments, to look at how it relates to history, to look at how it relates to faith, and advance.
Instead of just going along with the status quo and kicking the can like we do with the spending. Let's kick the can with the cultural narratives. Let's kick the can with world peace. Let's talk about, okay, we're at this 2-hour mark. I hope people have enough have enough patience to stay with us here, because I don't want to finish without us talking about this issue, specifically with Palestine and Israel. The war marches on. We know the war marches on because you can hear everybody talking about Iran. I don't care what Ben Shapiro says. I don't care what Mark Levin says. I don't care what other, sort of closer to the fringe, not really, but you could argue further out from the centrist, mainstream media. Although Mark Levin's pretty mainstream himself, but you know what I mean. Everybody on Fox is, for at least appearance purposes, called extremists by the liberal media. Opposition.
That's why the Democrats voted against Kevin McCarthy, because he's a Nazi.
Opposition,
right? They have
opposition.
to.
Right.
It's how the narrative can be worked against itself.
Yes. But so everybody, I don't believe these people saying, "Oh, well, we're not going to war with Iran. That's a fallacy. That's not what we're doing." The entire narrative is geared up against Iran. It's just the way it is. And not only did Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley and those guys say that it's Iran, but
David Barnea said it.
David Barnea said we're going to Iran.
The guy with his finger on the trigger said it.
Well, and again, if you put destroyers or battle carriers, what you're really doing is what you're really saying is we're calling the Iranians bluff. So you're not saying we're certainly not going to war with Iran. You're saying we're willing to call Iran's bluff, and if Iran wants to play, then we'll bomb Iran. And I said the other day on my podcast, and you can tell me what you think, I just want to know what the plan is here, what we're going to do here, because if we continue to bomb Palestine indiscriminately, the PR is a nightmare, number one. Moral hazard, you inspire another generation of the same issue you're having now of hatred and division between Palestine and Israel, or the Arabs and the Israelis. But if we get into a war with Iran, let's just say, worst case scenario, they bomb. Let's say they level Gaza, which I don't support. I don't support Israel making the claim that they should be able to level Gaza. But let's say they level Gaza, and let's say they can work out some deal with the Egyptians to push the Palestinians into Egypt or into Sinai or wherever, right? Make them live in the desert. I mean, come on, it's crazy. But let's say they could do that. Let's say they kill half the Palestinians and 1 million survive, and they go into Egypt. Minimal threat going forward. Terrible, tragic, but minimal threat. Scar on the soul for the political and the geopolitical small issue. If they go to bomb Iran, Iran is not Palestine. Iran ain't Gaza. Iran ain't got 2 million people, half of them women and children. Iran is a 90 million person country, and they are radical, and they are heavily militarized. And if you bomb them, which is the only thing we could do, is bomb them, because nobody in America would support a ground war, although we are sending 25,000 or we have 25,000 troops arming up right now in Israel. So boots on the ground are already there. 2,000 other just were activated. Every time we go in the Middle East, sometimes it's this kind of slow progression to full activation. But nonetheless, you can't go in and occupy Iran. We just lost in Iraq and Afghanistan, or we just left Iraq and Afghanistan. So nobody in America would be for occupying Iran unless something else happened that was even further in escalation that would make people amenable to that idea or think it's necessary. So you can't occupy it. You got to bomb it. You got bomb runs, you got cruise missiles, you got things you could do. Maybe you bomb Iran to hell. Maybe you cast it. If you bomb Iran to hell and people flee and they flee Iran, you're going to send potentially millions of highly trained, highly motivated men, women, children, teens. That is an inspired generation to have a real problem there all throughout the Middle East. Because where do they go? Iraq. Where do they go? Afghan. I mean, they're spread all throughout there. So, and I said, what happens if we bomb? Like, what's the plan after that? There's one person who benefits. What country benefits if we bomb Iran to hell and all the Iranians flee as refugees? We're not going in to occupy it. We're not going to go hold that
Are we
land.
talking about China now?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when I start to look at it at that level, at a level that most American citizens aren't really willing to, because they have a hard time believing that our leaders are, because our leaders kind of show us a face of incompetence so often, they have a hard time believing in that level of competence. But there is a shadowy sort of government that is highly competent. Yeah, Joe Biden may be falling asleep, but there are people back there who have very
Harvard educated,
secret jobs. They have secret jobs with secret
secret
job
societies,
titles, with secret titles that are very well organized and very, very dark, to say the least. They're evil people. When I look at things like that, say, let's just play it out all the way. We bomb Iran. We can't go occupy. Can't do it. We can't do it. We can't occupy Iran. So who's it left to? The Chinese.
They get to rebuild it.
They get to rebuild it. They come get the oil. They add another they add another resource-rich nation in the Middle East to their deck of cards
As a tributary state.
as a tributary state.
Lower cost of oil. They're seeking control in the Middle East anyhow. You know, one could say, and I have said this, that this whole recent history, I'm going to make a very direct statement. I make an I statement. I believe that this entire bloodletting was the Chinese looking at the creation of an economic corridor starting in India for the transportation of Indian manufactured goods by rail through Saudi, by sea first to UAE, then by rail through UAE to Saudi, to Jordan, to Israel, then by sea to Southern Europe, cutting 40% of the transit time for bringing those Indian manufactured finished goods to Europe, giving them an advantage in the competition for the European consumer. And I think the Chinese, who have spent so much money on Belt and Road, spent so much time developing infrastructure in the Middle East, I think they were just pissed because they hate the Indians and the Indians hate the Chinese. They hate each other so much so, in fact, something that your viewers and listeners can go look up. Within the last couple of years, there was a big battle between Indian and Chinese military. They didn't fight with guns. They fought with baseball bats wrapped in barbed wire. That's hatred. And a lot of Indians died. A lot. So I think the Chinese, this is my base case. I think the Chinese were so threatened by their Belt and Road Initiative being sidetracked by the Saudis, who are playing both ends, that they said to the Iranians, green light. And the Iranians said to Hamas, green light. And I think the Chinese are at the bottom of all of this. So when we're going out shopping this weekend to our big box store, Everything we're buying is coming from a Chinese company domiciled someplace in the world. These problems are so easy to solve. Here's how you solve this problem.
Pump oil. Stop buying.
Pump oil.
Pump oil.
Pump it.
Stop buying Chinese goods.
Bring back American manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no money for Russia and for Iran to finance war. And then our viewers and listeners, me, instead of paying $4.50 a gallon, I'll be paying $2.25 a gallon. Then I'll be able to go to dinner at a restaurant.
Would you go ahead?
Well, then I can go shop at a restaurant, buy a nice dinner. Then the waitress and the waiter, they keep their jobs. We're in a death spiral right now. With this kind of inflation, nothing's going to be left. And it's all energy based. So when you look at Iran as a source of energy for the Chinese, wouldn't it be better for them if they had to rebuild Iran out of the rubble of a U.S. attack? I agree. I think that's a dark strategy that one must consider. That really doesn't have anything to do with the
Palestinians.
They're being used. Oh, and then we go back to what I said about Jewish people. Jewish people, when you think you're the top dog, you don't perceive that anybody could be using you. But then that would mean that the Jewish identity and the Palestinian identity would be used alike.
They're the same in that
Well,
equation.
We're the same family.
Semitic.
Cousins. If the Palestinian people and the Jewish people could wake up to the fact that we're pawns in game of life, maybe they would team up and say, hey, fuck off. We're not going to kill each other.
Be a formidable alliance.
Well,
most people would say in our dreams. But then it would also say that a young black man from a crazy liberal state and a working blue collar community could become the tip of the spear for the ultra MAGA movement.
Well, we're going beyond some of these previous judgments. What I just want to say,
actually, to be honest, there's a much better chance that black men come over to the side of ultra MAGA than we come to some peace between the Palestinians and Israel, because where they've taken the conflict now is a level of barbarity, and I don't mean in one direction or the other. I just mean the temperature of the entire conflict is at a level. Its consequences would make it very hard to call a truce. Wouldn't you say? Or maybe not.
I think that there's a lot of people that recognize that where this is heading is not good. I think the people that believe in peace and believe in God on both sides are horrified and are praying and seeking some kind of rapprochement. As of this moment, has Israel entered the Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, they're there. I don't think that they've officially
bombed
started
the hell out of it.
I don't think they've officially started the ground invasion, but I saw a number of coverages of the situation where there were soldiers on the ground because they had found weapon caches. Now, I'm not sure if they're coordinating with Palestinian authorities to do certain ground searches. I don't even know how that all works in Gaza.
When the Israeli army enters Gaza, everybody that's listening is going to know it. It was supposed to happen immediately. Hasn't happened yet. Maybe it won't happen.
Because the Iranians said if they enter Gaza, they're going to strike Israel.
Maybe everybody will pull back from the brink. Maybe people will sit down and talk. It's a judgment to say that this has to have a genocidal outcome.
Right.
It would also be reasonable to say if past performance is any predictor of future outcomes, genocide, here we come. But there is a possibility.
No, I don't think genocide. I mean, let's be fair. People are going to kill me for this and say, let's be fair to Israel. But let's be fair here. They could drop a number of bombs on the Palestinian people and not kill them all. Right?
Correct.
40 million black people in the country. You could kill 20 million and still 20 million or more left. And I'm not justifying that by any means.
Well, for the 20 million, that'd be genocide.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
But it's not complete.
It's
extinction.
Not complete until it's every last one.
Until it's every last one. And that's not some type of moral victory. I'm saying that's good, but I'm just saying we have a ways to go before we reach the level of extinction level combat, or maybe not. I mean,
it's really an issue.
I mean, can the Israelis really drop a tactical nuke in Gaza? No.
No.
They can't even drop an atomic bomb in Gaza without without
Having it blow back on their own.
on their own people.
Right.
So there's some constraints already with what they could do. What I'd be more afraid of is some type of well, here's what I'm most afraid of now. What I'm most afraid of now is that other people, that the amount of global interest that are involved in this conflict reaches such a high number that any number of player could get involved in the situation and false flag one side against the other. And I think increasingly that's what we need to be worried about in the future, not only around the world, but particularly in this area, even if a peace can be found, which I'm not so sure peace is going to be found here. It seems like people are ready to go all the way, just from my view of it.
Sure seems like it.
But in the future, we need to be super cautious of the thing getting so big and so blurry that the sneaky player gets in, and like this hospital attack. As soon as I saw this hospital attack, and I'm not saying who it was one way or another, because for Christ's sakes, I live in Minnesota. America first. I mean, let's just keep it simple. America first. But because we're pondering it and talking about it, and it's a topic that people are interested in, as soon as I saw the hospital attack, I remember I texted you. I said, hospital was bombed.
Horrifying.
The Palestinians there on the ground say it's Israel. Israel says it's Hamas. Hamas will probably they won't claim responsibility for that because it would throw their whole narrative off. But they have no problem accepting claiming responsibility for barbarity. But it could be somebody completely different. I mean, we just don't know.
We don't know.
The fog of war. We don't know who it is. So a false flag to escalate things so that peace can't be found seems like something that would be probable rather than improbable at this point.
Well, there's information in Israel that most of the Israeli citizens want an investigation of how those Hamas fighters got into Israel and killed all those people, because that was alleged to be impossible, right?
Explain.
Well, I mean, come on. You're talking about
one of the most defended places in the whole world.
The most defended places.
Per the narrative.
It's the wall.
Per the narrative.
And great intelligence. And, you got the Palestinians posted those videos of front-end bucket loaders breaking the wall down. How'd they miss that? And why did it take 8 hours for the Israeli military to show up when, they could be there in an hour? So there's a lot of, the Israeli people want to know this. In fact, if you read in Haaretz, which is the Israeli main paper, there's a significant movement there to get rid of Netanyahu for his failure to protect the Israeli people.
And their point is to say, at that level of failure, at that level of incompetence,
what happened?
It becomes hard to know whether you genuinely missed,
we're stupid, or we're faking you were stupid.
Yeah.
These are when you talk about false flags. So the very initiation of and that's not Professor Penn saying it, that's the Israeli people who suffered from the attack. And I have to just say, because I know people have listened to me, and that, this is a very complicated issue for any American, who really want to think this through. This is so complex, so difficult. We got to stay at it. We got to stay at it as a people. It's a chance for us to clarify what's important to us.
And Bibi was facing mutiny from the radical left or the progressive left in Israel.
Oh, everybody's together now. That's over. It's just like Joe Biden and Anthony Blinken. They actually seem quite statesmanlike now in the middle of a huge bloodletting.
Not to me.
Not to me either, but I'm saying the way
to
they're
a wide body of people.
The way they're because we're
a bunch of Republicans are touting Joe Biden's response.
Really?
What?
I didn't see that. Really?
On Fox.
Are these the same people that are voting against Jim Jordan to be Speaker of the House today? Must be the same people.
Exact same people.
It's the same people. Who are these people? This is what American people...
Parasites.
We need a choice. What we have now is confusion. We don't have a choice because the choice is obscured because half the people on the other team are really false flagged in our own country. We got to have a choice. We have to be able to look out politically and say, we go this way or we go that way. They're not the same way. But what the Unity Party is telling us is we're all together now. So the suffering of the Palestinians, the suffering of the Jewish people, this is the glue that's now coming forward to hold our fractured polity together. And I just think it's incumbent on every individual American citizen to take some responsibility now. Your audience, this audience, is taking responsibility. They're studying, they're learning. They need to be going to source materials, doing their own research. We want everybody in the community here, this community, to be self-governing, to do their own research. This is complex. We don't say, hey, I'm going to say, I don't want to say we, I don't say I know the truth. I say I'm searching for the truth. And what I'm finding in this process is, as an American, my identity is American, and I'm a Jew. But my identity is for for America. My politics is for the American people, for the health and well-being of the people of my community. And I know that it's not my place to be involved all over the world as an empire, because empire and self-governance are mutually exclusive. So we just have to choose. Do you want to go have all these wars? Give up your freedom. Work for the military. Or reel it in, get rid of this judgment that America is the world's policeman. Get rid of the judgment that we're the greatest. I listen to Biden. We're the most powerful country, not just in the world, but in the history of the world. As if that's supposed to make me proud. That doesn't make me proud. How about we're the most moral country in the history of the world, the most just country in the history of the world, with the most informed populace, with the most well-being of the American citizens? Why don't we recalibrate what our goals are? It's an issue of consciousness, but that's what's great about a populist movement. Culture can change overnight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Young people like you can get into the zeitgeist, create a new zeitgeist of the times, and redefine what it is to be American.
What's the solution? You're BB Netanyahu. Because, and I said, in all fairness, if I'm BB Netanyahu, if I'm the prime minister of Israel, and Hamas comes across the wall, number one, there wouldn't be a day where the wall wasn't manned, because
That was strange, wasn't it?
just in general. I mean, there wouldn't be a day where we weren't on full alert, because per the narrative, the entire Arab or Muslim world is on the brink of knocking down your door and killing everybody in your country. So security is right to be high. So that I would be security full blown all the time anyway. But if they did come across, if they did attack and had the success in committing a atrocity that they did, I'd come back through Gaza and kick some doors too, for sure.
One thing
But
that
the bigger question is the separation of Gaza and Israel, or Palestine and Israel, as a matter of historical policy, and one state solution, two state solution. Nobody can look at the inception of Israel and not admit the fact. It's in bad taste. It's dishonest. It's disingenuous if you look at the map of Israel in 1948 and discredit the reality that not only in Gaza but on the West Bank, that the Palestinians have been restricted into smaller and smaller space.
reservations.
I mean, come on, Gaza. You can't, if you can't stop weapons from getting in and out of. Listen, the whole narrative about security worldwide is at stake here, and I think that's part of the real impulse to fight this conflict, or tell it a certain way. Because I mean, most people may not be thinking about it like this, but think about what it says about security in general, security writ large, surveillance writ large. If you can't keep tabs and weapons from out of bad people's hands in a space, in a little city that's completely walled off, and you have the best defensive military and an intelligence agency in the whole world. If you can't protect yourself against a little strip of land, what does that say about surveillance or
So
military worldwide?
we were talking about Riddick. Remember that scene in Riddick where he goes, "I got
I
soft,
got soft.
I got soft."
Hmm.
You know,
You're saying the Israeli government, the military, the defense has gotten sort of soft.
well, we got soft here too. It's the benefit of convenience and safety.
Mm.
I mean, I, the hardest thing for me as an American Jew that has these judgments about Israelis being highly competent war fighters.
Hmm.
Nobody had a gun. I mean, this was stunning to me that the people that were killed were unable to defend themselves. And in fact, there is a scene of hundreds of those party goers, rave goers, running across the desert trying to escape Hamas. And they were running, they looked to me like zebras running from lions. It was a very scarring image for me to uptake. But in defense, or not in defense, in just telling the facts as they were, what we're trying to get to, or what people are arguing about, is the solution to this problem, which is generally now thought to be a two-state solution by the left, and Israel's changing the facts on the ground, so that's impossible. But if you go back to 47, there was a two-state solution mandated by the UN, and the Arabs rejected it, and they attacked Israel in an effort to destroy the Jewish people that were living in the region, and they lost. So there has been wars, and these are ongoing set of wars because people can't sit down and talk and work out a problem. It's actually the old-fashioned way of settling a dispute. One man's standing and one man's not.
So what would we do? What would you want to do now? What should we do now? What can we do now?
Well, I know what I would do, but I'm Professor Penn. I'm kind of an outlier. I would go for a peace conference and solve the problem. I would use the trauma of the experience to bring people together and try to bring this to an end. My God, how far you want to go with this? But of course, it's about human consciousness. Where human consciousness
How
is.
do you rebalance the one state or two state?
I had a good friend, one of my best friends. His name was Jihad. Give you an idea who he was. His name was, no kidding, his name was Jihad.
Mm-hmm.
And we were friends for years, best friends. Like you and me, we're HEBROES.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that his idea, and I thought it was a beautiful idea. When I heard it, it was stunning. Because interestingly, I'd never heard it before because it was covered up in the Jewish community. But the original idea in 47 was to move the United Nations from New York City to Jerusalem, make Jerusalem the international city of all faiths and all people, and partition the country with the two people and make it the center of peace. The center of peace. So that was the original idea. That turned into this goat fuck. Now, that takes some skill to go from, we're going to resolve this by putting the United Nations here, making it a worldwide center of cooperation. And it became this. So I'm a believer in people sitting down and working out their differences. I do believe in a two-state solution. I don't see the Arab people as savages. I'm not afraid of Islam. I told you, sometimes I pray, I put my own forehead on the ground. So I have a kinship with my cousins.
Mm.
I know they believe in God. People say, oh, no, they don't believe in God. There are believers in there. No, there's a lot of people that wrap themselves in the cloth of faith.
Just like Christians.
Just like Jews. But what we need is real faith in the face of a technocracy that seems to be determined to kill or eliminate all the faith that there is on the planet. And why? Because if I believe in God, I'm self-governing. And if I believe there is no God, I have to be governed by a government. And that's really all. The fight is very simple. But as I look at it, I see a darker, deeper effort to destroy the Abrahamic faith, be it Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. It's the faith in God that's under assault. And then they get us fighting each other, which is perfect if you're the crown. That's how the crown does its business. How does a handful of people living on an island have the biggest empire in the history of the world? Well, first of all, get everybody hating each other so you can control them. Like our country. Blacks hate whites. Old people hate young people. We hate everybody hates everybody. That's very crownish. Our political organization. We got Minnesota. There's 63 different Senate districts. Nobody can even talk to anybody else. We're supposed to stay in our own little enclave like Palestinians. I mean, the whole thing is based on a formation of consciousness that comes out of the 1880s from Darwin and the Crown. We got to throw this off. I say this all the time. We got divorced from these people. The British
Why are we still living like these people?
what we
Are still living by their policies.
It's like having a
philosophies.
crazy ex-spouse that we can't get rid of. We got divorced,
Yeah.
but we just can't get it out of our system.
Yeah.
I mean, we got to get it out of our system. We got to get this thinking of division out of our system. You made a statement at the beginning of the podcast, in a very broad sense. There's just the human race. Who taught us to hate each other? No, look, there's a natural protection against the other, or because they might kill you.
Right.
That goes back to the way back.
Right.
But we're not living in the way back anymore.
Well, watch how easy it is to play one side against the other. Watch how easy it is here, again, in this narrative, at the highest level, we're the human race. That's the argument the communists and the globalists make. To not have borders.
Not have a country.
There are no such thing as borders because there are no such things as nations.
Yeah. Turns right back on itself. It's kind of like using the Constitution to destroy the Constitution.
I'm telling you.
Well, these are very smart people. Who said that? Oh, that'd be Donald Trump. These are very smart people. And they said it was an anti-Israel statement. I watched it about 4 or 5 times.
Because he said that they're smart?
They're smart and they're tough.
Well, they thwarted the intelligence of the best intelligence community or the best intelligence agency in the entire world.
Or they were on somebody's payroll.
Either way.
The other way.
Either way, they got their they got what they wanted out of it.
You know that
when people can wake up in the morning, want something, and achieve it, there's a level of efficiency to whatever they're pursuing.
I want to say,
there's nothing wrong with saying that.
I want to say when we have these,
you don't see this is a level. This tells you how bastardized the American intellect and the idea of citizenship has become. The idea that you can't give your enemies credit for for the skills and resources that they're able.
Kind of anti-Sun Tzu. Never underestimate your enemy.
Never underestimate your enemy. Well, these people are retarded.
Okay, I saw something, and I know we've been on for a long time, and I want to say these dialogues, for the viewers and listeners, we don't script this out. We're exploring together with you. I saw something that I thought was brilliant, that modern propaganda is not aimed at one side or the other. It's aimed at destroying reason and logic. And when a president can stand up and say, these people are smart and tough, and all of a sudden it's an anti-Israel statement, what's going on in the narrative is we're just destroying logic. The effort is to make it impossible for us to think about these issues furthermore. And what we're doing is we're trying to delve into these issues as far as we can so that we together as a community to make some progress to resolving what we're told is unresolvable, which is another scam. These are human-caused problems. That means there's a human solution to these problems. These problems are caused by humans, not caused by Martians, caused by humans. If I cause a problem in my life, if I have a will, there's a way to solve that problem. I want that will to emerge in the American citizens so that we can keep our country. I'm going to be very simple. I want to be very direct about this. I love the Jewish people. I want my neighborhood to be safe. Like in my backyard, like going from here to home. I want to be able to drive from here to home safely. I want to be able to feed my family. I'd like to be able to go out to eat with you. We stopped going out to eat because of the inflation, right?
Yeah. It's crazy.
They're clipping us out.
2 bowls of soup,
go
$80.
Look over here.
Give me a break.
Go look over here at this crazy. And don't look at what's happening in our own country. Don't look at what's happening in our own country, which is what you said at the beginning. We're being herded into the 4th Industrial Revolution. It's the only conversation that matters. The rest of this is to me, it's just a distraction. And there's such great distractions. How can you avoid talking about the right to life or war in the Middle East or war in the Ukraine? Or by the time we're done dealing with all these things, we're not even going to know we're human beings anymore.
The great Professor Penn, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate you coming back on. It was a blast. I thank you. We're going to continue to have you on as more coverage unfolds. If you haven't already, go and watch my interview with presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Just was released today on YouTube, on his YouTube channel, The Truth Podcast. Catch that if you can. The Great Professor Penn on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
7:30.
7:30, the Professor Penn Podcast. Like and subscribe to that channel. Leave a comment. Please leave a like and comment. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Visit freepeopleradio.com to find out where you can watch and listen to the podcast, audio platforms, video platforms. You can also now make a contribution to the Free People Radio patron platforms. There's 4 of those on there right now: Subscribe Star, Patreon, Donor Box, and Locals. Our prayers, our thoughts and prayers go out to everybody there in Israel, everybody in Palestine, everybody in the Middle East region affected by this conflict. It's never a fun sight. It's always a sad and somber sight to see little children die, little children
We can pray. We can
bloodied up.
We can pray properly. The millions of us, we can just pray constantly with all prayer. And just thank God for peace. We can just thank God because it says, whatsoever you wish for when you pray, believe you will receive it and you will have it. So we can just claim the peace as an American community. If 300 million people start thanking God for peace, there'd be peace. Take the time to pray. We need to pray for peace. We need to believe as a community in the power of our communal prayer for peace, for well-being. There's a strategy. That's a strategy.
And we also have the power to broker a peace. Let's not forget about that. We swing a mighty big political sword, and right now we got a bunch of feckless politicians and statesmen on their way to deal with the conflict.
If the American people were praying for peace and were in the streets peacefully protesting, this would change very quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, Royce, for having me on.
I appreciate it,
I'm
man.
inviting you on the Professor Penn podcast now. There, y'all heard it.
It's always a pleasure, man. We thank you for your viewership and your listenership today and in the future. The fight continues, and as always, Godspeed.
Thank you.